Welcome, everybody. This is Illiterate. My name is Evan.
My name is Taylor. I read a book this week.
Watched a movie this week. We are covering one of my childhood favorites. We are doing Who Framed Roger Rabbit.
The reason we're doing it?
Yes.
Because we felt like it. There's nothing really happening this week.
We were stuck. This name floated across our desk, and as soon as it did, we kind of lit up and went, oh, wait. Oh, yeah, that is based on a book. So we thought, what an incredible opportunity. Let's have some fun, something bright and funny, and really get to the heart of something that I think people really overlook is, yes, this was based on a novel.
Right.
It is about a tune-hating detective is a cartoon rabbit's only hope to prove his innocence when he is accused of murder. So this is a hybrid live-action cartoon film, if you haven't seen this. So what we're going to be discussing, because this film, it kind of sits atop animation and cinematic history in the late 80s, we're going to be discussing some more technical things. And so, as always, we have immaculate show notes that have our references and sources for everything that we speak about. But this week in particular, that might be of use to you if you're into that sort of thing, because we're going to be talking about particular tests and effects.
And various visuals, and this is a very visual thing. It's animation interacting with live action. And so if you want all the scoop on that, please click the links in the show notes.
There's a lot of material here to share.
This film, it was the most expensive film ever made when it came out in 1988. And that was held until 3 years later when Terminator 2 came out.
Ah, wow. Okay.
Which you wouldn't think, I mean, you think of this movie, but you wouldn't be like, God, that was the most expensive film ever made when it came out. But there was so much going into it. Also, hugely popular. It was the second highest grossing movie of 1988 that year.
Oh my God.
But the one thing we're going to bring up later on is that it is one of the highest grossing films never to receive a sequel. And usually when something is super popular, Hollywood snatches it up and says, well, let's do it again.
This is an awesome opportunity to open up this subject and really be like, what makes this thing tick? Why does this exist? Because I mean, I'm sure there are people out there who don't even understand how the character came about. Like, so I'm sure some people think he is a legitimate 1940s cartoon character when that just is, it couldn't be further from the case. So,
So let's start with the book. This is one of the rare cases where the writer has preferred the film over his original work.
Oh, really?
We'll talk about some of the sequel stuff and what he did with it after, but he was like, oh, that's what I wanted to write, not this. This guy is Gary Wolfe. He was an Air Force captain in the Vietnam War, won a Bronze Star and 2 Air Medals.
Oh, wow.
Interesting, quirky dude. He has a large collection of carousel horses.
Oh, man.
Just fun guy. He got the idea watching cereal commercials with the animated characters talking to real people. Done things like that. Was like, oh, what if that was actually happening? So as far as the adaptation, the film is very loosely adapted. The book is called Who Censored Roger Rabbit. As some examples, there's no Judge Doom, the main villain, his crony weasels.
The Christopher Lloyd character.
The cab that speaks. None of that stuff is in there. It is more of a serious mystery novel in the hard-boiled private eye stories. And if you're interested in those kind of things, we have an episode about Motherless Brooklyn, which delves more into that kind of crime noir genre and the history of all of that. So check that out if you're interested in that. The big change in the book versus the film is that it's not about animated cartoons. It's about newspaper comic characters.
Ah, I see. Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and so it's got like Snoopy and Beetle Bailey and Hagar the Horrible and newspaper comic strip stuff.
That
and
not
the 1980s cartoons.
And that makes sense just looking based on just the medium itself. If you're doing with print and pages,
right?
There's a certain lingo and connotations that just flow with that, and that is the same when you go to a medium like film and television. I'm guessing that has got to be some of that, some of that reason why they made those shifts.
So the other big things is it's in the present day, so it doesn't have that period piece quality, but it's not really explained how this world works. It's just these characters exist in the same space, which is a huge novel concept, I think. In and of itself, it's like you could make something just based off of that. Oh, these aren't drawn. They're actually real. And the way that it works is they pose for pictures, and that's what becomes the comics, versus like in Who Framed Roger Rabbit, where they're acting in things, and then it becomes the cartoon.
Yeah.
And, some of the other conventions of the newspaper stuff is they have speech bubbles that appear in real life and then disintegrate. And so if you're a person in the real world, you don't like that and people are stepping on them. It like becomes almost this trash hazard for people.
It's like litter.
In certain tunes, it still definitely feels like the undertones of like segregation or racial discrimination that the film has, in the sense of like, oh, here are the tunes and here are people. Yeah. And the privileges that are not afforded to them and the lower status that they have. So that does still also fit in. As far as the speech bubbles, it's used in the plot. So like if a Toon character dies, his last words are still there lingering.
Oh my God.
That's also kind of featured in there. But that brings up the difference, which is, okay, well, how can they die? Like, isn't that the thing with Who Framed Roger Rabbit? It's like a Toon can stretch and bounce and fling themselves. They can do all this cartoon stuff. Right. But in this, they can get shot. They're just like normal people out in the world, except they're cartoons. So there's this odd premise in the book that the Toons can create this doppelganger with psychic energy that runs errands and also does the stunts in the photographs that they take for the cartoons.
Oh, they have a weird stunt double, like a weird clone that does all the things they don't want to do.
Yeah, exactly. So they manage that through their mind, and then it could last for an hour or it could disappear in a day, depending on how hard you're able to concentrate on keeping this apparition available.
This is trippy. This is really trippy. This is so much more. This is a bit deeper than I really ever expected anything from this. Not like this is like. I want to sit back and like think about what is the implications of all of this? Like, what does a thought bubble disintegrating on the ground look like? Does it smell?
Well, and that's probably why they picked it up, because it is so novel and interesting and unique. It involves animation and things that they might, be interested in. Roger is one of these characters who's like, with Baby Herman is still there, Jessica Rabbit is still there, and then the detective Valiant is still there, but those are really the only characters that make the transition. Okay. He's framed for this murder of his boss because he's not getting top billing in the cartoon. Baby Herman is getting top billing in the cartoon. Okay. So he's going to this detective to try and figure out, he's being framed for this murder. And then within the first quarter of the book, Roger Rabbit gets murdered as well.
What?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Because Valiant goes to him and finds him dead with a bullet and his floating speech bubble.
Eddie.
Yeah. And that's, he's just draped over the banister on the stairwell of his apartment. And so what happens
I hope your last words were like who the killer was.
Well, unfortunately, that's not what happened at all. Yeah.
No.
So then this is where the doppelganger part comes in, because the doppelganger was off running an errand and comes back to Valiant for help and is like, hey, you've got to clear my name. And also there's time pressure because the doppelganger is going to disappear.
Oh, whoa.
Depending on how, you know what I mean? Because he's dead.
Roger's doppelganger is stuck looking like he murdered Roger and is also going to deteriorate within a certain amount of time.
So all this stuff happens. It's more very, like I said, crime, noir, him interviewing different people, that kind of stuff. But the ending, it turns out that Roger did kill his employer and wanted to plant evidence against the detective. But the detective figures it out in advance, stops it all, and then that doppelganger Roger deteriorates at the end, which fits more with the noir aesthetics, like the crime doesn't pay, but it's never really resolved, kind of like the old Batman, like
the lingering ghost of him not being able to really write it
and finish what needs to be finished in the city. So, but you learn something, and it's like I said, it's not even really necessarily silly. It's almost like a blunt, wry humor because of the improbable situation and the fact that it's cartoons and the speech bubbles and stuff like that. But the story itself is not whimsical, and Roger Rabbit himself is not funny. He's not trying to be a stand-up comedian kind of character.
Okay.
So none of that translates from what I read.
That is That is fascinating.
Yeah.
And tonally very different.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my gosh, I couldn't imagine.
Premise,
But I mean, and you can certainly see the things that they latched on to go, okay, this would make a family experience. We can use these characters instead of, it is a light family movie. It's certainly what I do appreciate, that it doesn't shy away from seriousness, and it certainly has dark, even frightening moments.
Yeah, everybody's like, oh, the Judge Doom gives me nightmares.
Yeah, absolutely. We're dealing with and they really upfront present the idea of toon mortality You watch the little shoe get dipped, and I mean, like, they give you nightmares for real. So it's, but I appreciate that as an audience member, is you're not treating the child or the adult as while it is fun and light, it certainly has those moments that get very, very serious and make every audience member, no matter their age, really do some thinking and start feeling some really deep fears.
And that tonality, the mixture of lightness and darkness, sits interestingly. I guess we have to talk about the historical context of this, because it seems like, oh, this is a unique, one of a kind thing that has never been duplicated. Where does it fit before and after in cinema and animation? And I guess the risk for this film, for what I saw, it was instead of like, oh, this is a huge gamble, it's almost like, who cares? Like, so in the 1960s, there was no longer this appeal for the movie cartoon, specifically because of television. So we had a lot of like the animated sitcoms like the Flintstones and the Jetsons, but those really only lasted until the 70s. But nobody cared about the reruns from the 30s and 40s, the classic Mickey Mouse, Bugs Bunny, any of that kind of stuff. And then as we go into the mid 80s, Disney is not doing well. This is like ideas that they almost might go under because of how little things are working out.
Idea of resting on their laurels from the 40s, 50s, and 60s, and now we're approaching the mid 80s, and well, hold on, all of our classics came out 20 years,
Yeah, and so like what was going on in the late 70s, early 80s is the Rescuers movie did not do well, Fox and the Hound, and then Black Cauldron, which doomed its animation department. We won't get too much into that, but that was like a huge failed effort.
Really? No, I'm
from
not
Disney.
aware.
Yeah, you don't even know it. And then their live action situation where they're trying to play around with this stuff, Tron came out, but it didn't do as well as they'd hoped. Cost a ton.
That found a cult following later on. That didn't help at the time. That didn't help anybody's argument then.
Right. And so audiences of the 80s at this point are also more attuned to sci-fi and horror. Star Wars, Alien.
Star Wars is out. We're off to the races. Alien has come out. Aliens comes out in 1986. So this is
right. So the question then is like, would audiences care about the tropes of film noir, the detective, the redheaded dame, this murder that actually reveals the corrupt citywide conspiracy? Like, why would that even happen? So here comes the development of this. They immediately bought the book rights as soon as it came out. The book came out in 1981. They bought it. Disney bought the book rights. As we said, they could probably see some potential in it somehow.
Yeah. I mean, the concept on its face is like, okay, we've got real live action people intermingling with some, a cartoon on some level. Like
that's always been a novelty. But what if it was the premise? Yeah.
Somebody's okay. We can get in on that. We can, like establishing dominance on a piece of material.
Yeah. So this guy, Robert Zemeckis, offers his services to be the director of it, but they're like, no, because
this is just off of the heels of Back to the Future.
Well, so previous to that, he offered his services. This is only 1981. The only two films that he had made were box office bombs. He's a nobody. He sucks. Right. So they're like, we don't want you. So he's going to come back later, like you said. But we'll talk about that when he gets back. But it's funny that once they bought the book, he was like, I want to do this. And they're like, no, you're not good. The one blessing to accepting this kind of a story was because Chinatown came out in 1974, which was seen as a resurgence of that sort of crime noir, corrupt city thing. So there was at least a hope. Oh, audiences might be interested in this. So Disney is like, cool, we got it. We're going to develop some test footage and get some scripts going. It's the work of these two guys, Jeffrey Price and Peter Seaman. And the things that they did after this, they did the movie Wild Wild West, which you get that quirky sensibility.
Yeah.
They also did the Jim Carrey Grinch, which I absolutely love.
Adore it. Absolutely. That will be an episode one day.
And then they also did Shrek 3. So they're all over the place. They're a great writing duo. And they had various drafts involved because, as we talked about the book, they were trying to figure out who the villain was going to be. So they had Baby Herman maybe being the villain, Jessica being the villain, Roger dying because he dies in the book. How does that all work out?
All those avenues.
All these different kind of drafts. They even had Doom shooting Bambi's mom.
Oh my God, I love that.
All sorts of kind of stuff.
I adore that.
Mixing in with Disney history, but it's just a mess. But then they also have this test footage that they're doing to try and explain how this is going to work out. They use
because nobody's ever seen anything like this before.
Yeah.
At this time, we've never even seen a 3D character in the frame with anybody, and let alone trying to bring over something from what's considered a different medium.
Or there was a little bit like Mary Poppins had come out, and there's the whole penguins thing, but that was a small little half of a musical number,
right? And
situation.
What became what they focused in on was integration. How does it actually feel like the characters in the 3-dimensional space with them? And that comes down to interaction. What props and set dressing are they bumping into or messing up, or what part of the clothes need to furl as he rushes by? Those types of they found out that was the key.
They haven't even gotten to that. Yeah, they haven't even gotten to that yet, though. At this point, they're still in the idea of we just got to see what this looks like interacting with people and how sustainable is it to do this. So early behind the scenes comes from 1983. It only aired on the paid Disney Channel at the time, which had just come out. And so lost to history, the intersection of people who had paid for the Disney Channel, had a recording VCR, cared about Roger Rabbit to record it, and had the prowess to upload it to YouTube. that intersection is very small in terms of seeing this, but it finally resurfaced. Came out in 2014. So I'll post, like I said, the link to it so you can see what they were trying to do with it. It's just sort of like pencil drawings moving around people. The revamp that happens as it's not really working out is in 1985. Michael Eisner becomes the CEO of Disney.
Ah, yes.
And he says, we need a powerhouse. Let's get Spielberg up in here.
Right.
We need some help on this. So Spielberg, the deal that gets down is he gets more creative control and the box office, and Disney keeps the merchandising and the after effects of that. So Robert Zemeckis, here he comes back again, because now he's successful. He's done Romancing the Stone, and he did Back to the Future. And so he's known for pushing the special effects world. And what he ended up doing, Forrest Gump, he did Polar Express, he did Contact, these movies that really push the limit of computer effects or practical effects and that kind of thing.
100%.
And of course, Back to the Future is...
I mean, if you just take it, we got Back to the Future, Roger Rabbit, and Forrest Gump. Number one, what a range. Number two, oh my God, those are 3 classics in 3 different genres.
Yeah. Known for their technical and their storytelling, like beyond just this is a cool movie. It's like it's a
every piece of them are teachable.
Yeah. So he's on from Back to the Future, but he wants this animator guy, Richard Williams. Underappreciated name. He had done a lot of film title stuff, commercials, Pink Panther, various shorts. He comes out of London, and his whole thing is not animating on 2s, which is where there's 24 frames a second. He animates 24 times a second, 24 pictures that he draws each second. And he's the one who's the proponent, huge, of camera movement, and he never just the animation of doing a profile view and the characters going back and forth across. He's like, why don't we treat it like an actual kid? It's a lot more drawing. It's a lot harder to do. The last thing that he did of note was a short that was nominated for an Oscar in 2015, and I'll post a link to it. It's on YouTube. It's called Prologue, and it's all pencil drawing, but it's one fluid movement between the characters. It's like the camera never stops rotating around them and zooming in and out. Cool. It's just amazing, insane. And unfortunately, he passed away last year, but is an absolute legend when it comes to animating. So he's on, and then the test becomes, Disney says, well, we've done Pete's Dragon, we've done Mary Poppins, and then like you said about the rules, here's the rules. You can't move the camera because it's hard for the animators to do the movement.
They were worried about the perspective. Can the animators keep up with the perspective shift of the camera? And the answer is yes. It just takes more time, which then equals more money. And through the 1940s, 50s, and 60s into the 1980s, it had become a kind of a generalized rule that moving the camera just wasn't. You don't do that. If you're going to do these types of shots, you can't do that. And so the filmmakers got so upset with that, in particular Robert Zemeckis. They want to move the camera, and they end up shooting all this live action stuff almost exactly the way they would shoot any other movie. The thing is they had to understand that it was just going to take exponentially more time, but having to kind of retrain everybody's thought of like, no, it can work differently. This can totally work differently if we just say, we need to. If you make a
Yeah.
concerted decision to do something different, then you can.
And Disney had said, similarly to the camera, it's like, don't futz around with light and shadow, like keep all the colors even so everything is flat, like don't do anything crazy with that. Zemeckis said, like you said, well, we're going to break all those rules.
Yeah, it's like, we're going to shoot this like a normal movie.
But they had to prove it. So they're like, well, we're going to do a test footage like they had been doing test ideas. And there's also a link to this, and you can kind of see the comparison difference between what Zemeckis and Williams ended up coming up with, where they're like, let's do something that violates all those rules. So it's Valiant, the detective, walking down a dark stairwell in a back alley. Roger Rabbit follows him. There's car headlights. Roger Rabbit, they specifically made a klutz so that he can interact with stuff and knock things over, and the camera's tracking around. Everybody said everything would be impossible, but then when they showed it, there were a few people in the room that are like, who's in the rabbit suit? Like, they didn't even think it was animated because it was lit so well and moved so naturally going downstairs while a camera is circling around.
They were ecstatic over this test. They were, the people that were working on it wanted to find some way to put images of that test into the movie. I mean, they were so ecstatic with the way that it actually came out.
Yeah. And so, as you said, they have to shoot all of the live action first and then draw all of the animation over top of it. There's no computers involved. So here's where it starts with the live action stuff. The main actor, Bob Hoskins, legacy-wise, we could say perhaps he's the template for modern blockbuster performance because he created the norm of acting with nothing. Like, a lot of the times he's on a blue screen because in Toontown there's nothing, and all the main characters that he's interacting with. Yeah,
so many practices now that are just common day. Even like movies like The Hissing Booth probably has dozens of visual effects things where they're actually employing the exact same techniques that Who Framed Roger Rabbit is engineering. That Bob Hoskin, the actor, is actually figuring. I mean, could you imagine? Can you imagine the opportunity there as an actor in your field to be able to? Okay, nobody's ever done it. Like, and you're finding how this kind of works. And what I think is, I wanted to bring him up, is Charlie Fleischer. The guy that actually plays Roger. It was him and Bob Hoskin. I mean, I think the camaraderie between the two, their rapport is just absolute magic. And what was so funny is that Charlie Fleischer was on set for every take, for every moment of filming Who Framed Roger Rabbit. And for largely all of it, he was dressed as Roger Rabbit, just off screen, just around the corner, watching. And he kind of pioneered what he called trans-projectional acting, where he's watching Bob Hoskins.
Because Bob Hoskins is doing nothing. Yeah, he's holding up nothing. But he's actually
handcuffed to Roger, but there's just handcuffs there, no Roger. But he's got to block out the whole. He's got to move all the way around his set. He's got to hit all his marks. He's got to have this great big performance, all these big wild moves. Like, and it's very physical. And so you have then Charlie off to the side watching all this physicality and giving all the grunts and bups and improving in the moment.
The dialogue as well. Yeah, just everything that would be as if he was the rabbit sitting in there, and God, he's got the rabbit suit. And Hoskins had said initially when he had seen him in the rabbit suit off camera, acting the dialogue, he was like, oh, he's out of his mind. He's crazy. But then, of course, he's like, he's a genius. It helped so much.
He's a genius.
I also thought it was funny, the guy, Lou Hirsch, who did Baby Herman, he's like, if they think I'm wearing a diaper, you got another thing coming. Like, this isn't for all the animated people. Yeah, and as far
Charlie
as
Fly, I wanted to harp on him for a second.
Sure.
I mean, I think he's just so wildly talented and forgotten. I mean, the soul of this character would be so different with any other actor. I mean, and Charlie.
And he came up as a stand-up comedian. So he was
really?
He was like, the purpose in my life is to make people laugh. So he's like, I relate more to Roger than any other human character I've played, because that's at the heart of this, is he's struggling with that as a rabbit.
That's so funny, too, because I kind of came aware of him circumvented in another way, as he actually had a cameo role in David Fincher's Zodiac. He's so foreboding as this like very, very menacing character with a ton of question behind him. And I went home and I looked him up and I realized, oh my God, that's right. He's Roger Rabbit. And I had no idea. And I instantly had just an immense respect for him because I only these two pieces do I know of his work, but I'm seeing this wild, absolutely wild range.
And speaking to the range of that, as far as Bob Hoskins' work, like we said, he's talking to nobody. He's talking to an empty chair, not an animated rabbit. They all went to mime training because it's like if you hold your hand up.
Oh, wonderful. Yes.
If you hold your hand up in front of your eyes and look at your hand and then remove your hand, your eyes will then naturally gravitate to focus on what's beyond it. And it shows on film. It's like you have to imagine that something is in front of your eyes to look at it, and the weight of things picking them up that aren't there. You have to train your muscles differently to do those things. And Bob Hoskins was basically like, I had to learn how to hallucinate because if the character's not there, it's not going to look right. And he was a master. Everybody was like, he was insane how he could do that, interact, look away and look back. And it would be like exactly where he was looking.
Apparently the animators were flabbergasted at how good he was at it. And I mean, he's really figuring it out live.
He said he played with his daughter so much before doing this because she had an imaginary friend, Jeffrey. It was about that age. And so he was like, I'm pushing my imagination to the front of my mind all of the time with this. And also, this is crazy, working on this skill, 16 hours a day. These are film shoots, 8 months straight. I just couldn't even believe that. Like, we talk about other films and things that take 30 days to film. And we're saying, it's like, no, it was 8 months. So he started hallucinating in real life where he's like, I'd be talking to somebody and then I'd see a weasel walk around the corner. And so doctors were like, take a few months off. And he ended up not working for a whole year after making this movie because it was so mentally taxing. And maybe that also ties into why it would be hard to get a sequel made if he's not super pumped to go back into imaginary land.
If you want to dip your toes back in those waters immediately.
And then, of course, Christopher Lloyd is the other big one who was in Back to the Future, so it makes sense why he would be in this one.
Yeah. One of the most striking villains of my childhood.
Yeah. Let's talk about where Spielberg is in all of this. What the heck's he doing?
Lord, he's popping up all over the place.
So his stuff, these are all the people in front of the camera. He's more behind the scenes on this, and he's the one who really got the studios to agree to license their characters. So this is the only feature film to have Mickey Mouse and Bugs Bunny in the same thing. He's the one going to all these places. Disney has 81 pre-existing characters that appear in this film. Warner Brothers has 19. He also got characters from MGM, Paramount, Universal, Fox, King Features, and Al Cap cartoons.
All these entities hate each other. All these entities wish the other entity was eradicated from the face of the planet.
But Spielberg's got those.
This will never happen again unless Spielberg himself makes a sequel happen and jams this down.
Well, and some people are like,
never happen again.
He did it again with Ready Player One, where there's all these classic 80s characters.
It's true. That's great. I hadn't thought about that comparison. It is very true.
He's the only one that can do it.
He's the only one.
So that's how this all came to be. The ones that they couldn't get, that they were trying to, that fit into the same thing. Popeye's not in here. Mighty Mouse, Tom and Jerry, Casper the Friendly Ghost. Those whoever owned them didn't want them in there.
They don't want to play ball.
They didn't want to play ball.
They missed out on the game.
And now they regret it. The thing with the crew, and all of this sounds like it's great, but they didn't know what they had. Jeffrey Price, one of the screenwriters, he was like, people would ask what they're working on in the lunchroom of Disney, and they'd say, Who Framed Roger Rabbit? And people would go, oh, okay, good for you. And then they see
Charlie Fleischer in the rabbit costume in the cafeteria.
They're like, well, what in the world? Good old luck to Who Framed Roger Rabbit. And then the other screenwriter was like, we tried to do preview audiences stuff, but we had to film it all. So it's like kind of loose pencil tests, totally unfinished animation. People walked out. It's like they freaked out. They could only show it when it was done. So it's like they were unsure until the last minute of making the thing.
And that's the thing. It's like, so they shoot it. I'm not entirely clear, but they shoot it, and then it's a 2-year process of getting it actually animated and finished.
Yeah, so it was 14 months of post-production. And like we said, this is by hand, not a computer shot in this movie. Williams is very much the things that he's described. It's the production caliber of Disney with the character design of Looney Tunes and the personality and humor of Tex Avery, the zany old cartoons. And just to keep putting it in perspective, they had to draw. So they filmed the thing. It's 24 frames, 24 pictures every second. They had to draw on every single frame, everything that's animated. If it's a crowd scene of 20 cartoons, and then it's another picture and they've all slightly moved, they have to redraw all of that and then hand paint it onto every single cell of film, which this actually ends up being around 82,000 cells. So that's 82,000 custom hand-drawn paintings of immaculate detail on top. Insane as it is anyways. That's where it stops with most films. They then also have shading, shadows, highlights, this 3D look to match the lighting in the scene, as well as changing the focus between characters as they move from the background to the foreground, because this is actual film. So
now this is all effects work that is second nature. This is like all these things are used constantly nowadays, right? Things that you would never even imagine.
And with computers like that.
Yeah.
This is a human being with a white paintbrush.
Yeah, like figuring out this sheet of diffusion. No, that's probably 5% too much. Let's try, like physically sitting out and looking at it through the device.
Yeah, not a scroll wheel. So the thing that the industry term that is now created by this film is called bumping the lamp. And what it is,
I hadn't heard of that.
Yeah, animators know it. It's the industry term for putting in the extra tremendous effort to aesthetic that probably people won't even notice. And I'll post a link to a video that shows kind of how this lays out, but follow with me here verbally. So moving the camera anywhere, like you said, Richard Williams, he's like, why isn't it done? It's because people are lazy. Isn't it hard? Yeah, it's twice as hard, but we're going to do it anyways. So in this scene where the term comes from, Roger Rabbit and Eddie Valiant are handcuffed together and they're trying to figure out how to get him off. And they're in this storeroom underneath this bar. And there's a low hanging lamp that Eddie Valiant keeps hitting his head against as they're careening around the room, trying to figure out how to get out of these handcuffs. And so just thinking about, they have drawn the characters. There are 6 other things that come about after that. So they have the shadow of the character, whatever is shadowing the character. They have a mask as a backlight, so the way that the character is being backlit from whatever light is going on in the scene. Then there's a shadow mat over top of the character, softened for what's going on to the character. Then there's another shadow mask as a cast shadow for what the character is shadowing in the environment. There's an interpolative mask that gives the character 3D dimensionality to round them out. And then there's an articulate mask for when live action elements go in front and interact with the animated elements, and you have to cover that in a different shadow. So there's those 6 things. The bumping the lamp is just, okay, we could do this, and they're sitting together and there's no camera movement, and he's trying to get the handcuffs off. They bump the lamp 5 or 6 times in this thing, meaning he's hitting his head. The light is swinging all over the scene. You don't notice how difficult it would be to change all of that lighting, all of those shadows, all of the masking, all of the overlapping. They even get to the point
real quick, just for our listeners, have you ever seen a lighting experiment on somebody sitting stationary and the lighting source move around their head, and what those shadows do from their nose, from their mouth, how they move long across one to side and then come back to the middle and move long across to the other side.
Yeah.
That light source is swinging these different angles on every piece of this set, all those shadows elongating and moving back to the center, moving now elongating out to the other side and moving back to the center. I mean,
covering various items. They're both of the characters are moving around. One of them is animated, handcuffed to somebody else who's not animated and doing crazy animated things. All of this, they even thought of if you look and slow it down as his ears cross where the light might be shining towards the camera, they're slightly translucent. They didn't have to do any of that. They thought of absolutely everything, and they could have made it easy, but they made it hard on themselves because it helps you believe that there is actually an animated rabbit interacting with somebody in this scene. And that scene is not even an important scene. It's not a crazy action thing. It's just them trying to get the handcuffs off.
Yeah. You could have taken your hand under the handcuffs at any time. Not in any time. Only when it was funny.
So bringing that up, that's the point. It's all of that stuff that we just mentioned is outside what Evan just said, which is the storytelling and the humor and the heart that the film has. That's what people are focusing on. They're not focusing on his translucent ears.
Right.
But you get it. So this had, at the time it was made, the longest closing credits. It was over 10 minutes and 800 cast and crew members.
I see, and I wonder about that kind of thing every day, or not every day, but every time I go see a new Marvel movie or something like that, and I watch all the VFX artists and all those types of things. I've thought about, God, the credits are getting long. That's funny. This had the longest credits at that point.
Like I said, 82,000 paintings.
82,000.
So now
14 months.
Yeah, God, it's done though. It's finally done. The CEO Eisner and Zemeckis, of course, disagree about the final cut. It's too risque. Too many sexual references. Zemeckis refuses to make alterations because, like we said, they kind of hold the leverage when it comes to final cut, and Disney's got the merchandise and all that stuff. But Spielberg is on Zemeckis' side.
Thank God.
Yeah.
I just wanted to thank these filmmakers for trusting the audience. Yes, it's a children's film, but we can handle so much. Come on.
Yeah. So Disney didn't think so. So it was released under their Touchstone Pictures label instead of Walt Disney Pictures, because they were trying to distance the Walt Disney brand from this. Now that they've made it and it's out, it won the Oscar for editing, sound editing, and visual effects. And Richard Williams won a Special Achievement Award in animation for all of his work. And like we said, this thing was the second highest grossing movie of 1988. Rain Man beat it out somehow. And
Rain Man. Okay.
But how?
Okay, Tom. Okay.
You did it again. So, but like we said before, how is this one of the highest grossing films never to get a sequel? Why was there not a sequel?
Exactly. How there's never waned interest in this. So
let's talk. We got to go back to the book. Our boy Gary Wolfe, he wrote a book sequel in 1991. Remember, the film came out in 88. And the sequel is called Who Plugged Roger Rabbit? Bizarre, because like we said, he loved the movie more than the first thing. So it shares continuity with the film. It's not a sequel or a prequel. It's just another story in that world. So
he wrote a sequel to the film, not his own novel.
Yeah. So it's Roger Rabbit trying to get in the role of a toon adaptation of Gone with the Wind.
Kind of like Jurassic Park. Michael Crichton wrote the sequel. He had killed Malcolm in the first book, but Malcolm is the main character of the sequel,
right?
Because he loved the Malcolm character in the movie so much. That's really incredible, actually.
In the sequel book, in chapter 12, Jessica Rabbit claims that the events of the first book were just a dream, so it just voids everything to do with the speech bubbles and all. I mean, just completely. He's just like, well, people like the film more, so I'm just going to negate everything that I wrote.
There you go.
Just use the characters that they came up with in Hollywood and
there you go, Gary.
Town and all that stuff. Yeah. So that happened.
And in terms of so he wrote the sequel. It comes out 91.
But in terms of the film sequel, Disney and Warner Brothers and everybody's all in it. They had come up with some shorts to keep the brand alive because they're like, well, there's definitely going to be a sequel thing to this. The big short.
Right. And I think this kind of adds in. I've seen these shorts. I love these shorts, but I think this gets misconstrued of where they belong and how, like, did they precede or did did they come before, where, because most people, Roger Rabbit has faded into this almost
like you said, like he's a mythology of is he from the 1940s? No, this isn't a Hanna-Barbera cartoon that then they turned into. Yeah, so the shorts
like a
are
paradigm.
Weird.
You're not even thinking about where he came from. He just is.
So they had these shorts. The big one aired before Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, which got everybody still interested and involved. But the thing was, Spielberg wanted it to be before one of his films, but they wouldn't let him air it. And so he vetoed a lot of the things that end up coming about with the production of the sequel. But I think it's more than that from his side, which we'll get into. So there were several scripts that were commissioned. There was even one commissioned by J.J. Abrams. And this is actually the first meeting he ever had with Steven Spielberg, was his pitch for a Roger Rabbit sequel. He had never met Spielberg before this. And now, of course, they're peas in a pod.
Like thieves.
But that got to an outline and then nothing. You also have to think of Spielberg and Zemeckis. They are creators, but they're Disney outsiders. They don't really have anything to do with Disney. But the fact that Disney co-owns the character with them makes it for an odd mix. Spielberg is also known for doing one-off things that he then never returns to. So as the scripts are progressing, there's a prequel version that takes place in World War II where Roger Rabbit learns that his dad is Bugs Bunny. And it's sort of, as playing with the crime noir thing, it takes a jab at the propaganda films of Disney and Warner Brothers during that World War II era where they'd use Daffy Duck and Mickey Mouse and all of that to promote the war effort. Spielberg.
That sounds cool.
Yeah. So that was a full script. Spielberg was not involved in that at all. He didn't want to do it because he had done Schindler's List, and he's like, I'm not trying to satirize Nazis or make light or have anything to do with involving this subject matter.
Right. You can't win the Academy Award for Schindler's List and then turn around and make a
cartoon about
satire of World War II.
Yeah. And the film industry during World War II. So he could not be involved in that. He had also started DreamWorks at the time, which is now a Disney competitor. So he's not interested in really working with them to do a collaborative thing.
Yeah, he doesn't want to help them make some big success when He's trying to make a company that wants to take some of that market share.
Yeah, exactly. So all of that factors in. And then there's another sequel that's come about, not the World War II prequel. There's a sequel idea that was seriously considered in 1998, but here now CGI is coming in and animation is no longer interesting. So I found there's a screen test from 1998 showing a CGI Roger Rabbit interacting in a room with stuff.
What? I feel like I might have seen this. I can't remember if I saw this.
It's very short, but the CGI they realized would probably not be worth the price because it's too expensive at this point because it's so early on. And they're like, what is even the point? Yeah. Because the whole thing was that it was animated based on the old 50s animation. Right. So if you're doing CGI, what is that referencing? What
does it say? What does it say? What are you saying?
So then that went down. And as recently as 2013, there was a pitch with Roger Rabbit and Mickey Mouse coming up through vaudeville, like them working in that frame. It's a remake sort of a 1952 film called The Stooge, but that never went anywhere. And then Bob Hoskins passed away in 2014, so he could no longer be involved in anything. Zemeckis said, there's a good script somewhere, but he's just like, I can't imagine Disney ever considering making it now because of how, like we said, how dark it is, how crazy it is. So it's not lost. And the big point, I guess, would be the legacy of this and what we don't even realize. So this thing came out in 1988. 1989 is the start of the Disney Renaissance and the modern age of animation. The Little Mermaid came out. Obviously, it was being worked on, but people had an awareness and an affinity for cartoons and feature film cartoons, not just television and sitcoms. Exactly.
The 90s saw a big resurgence on what an animated movie really could be.
And it's this kid-friendly musical that's reigning supreme. And then, of course, we have Lion King, Aladdin, Beauty and the Beast, Hercules, all of that stuff. Also created a renewed interest on television for Disney and Warner Brothers. So DuckTales, Chip and Dale, Darkwing Duck, all that stuff with Disney. And then Tiny Toons, Animaniacs, Sylvester and Tweety Mysteries, they're coming back with their old characters. In cartoon television.
Roger never really conflated with these other things, though, and I feel like Animaniacs consumed a lot of those. Almost, at some point, all these characters went in and out of that door. But it feels natural that Roger would live there with them, and they would be in that universe. But I don't think that was the case. Now that I remember it, I don't think Roger was present.
Well, because Disney partly owns it, and Animaniacs is an entirely Steven Spielberg thing.
Yeah.
Some other animation.
Sad. I want more. I want there to be more Roger. God,
he's kind of just
he's stuck in this like tug of war, and almost.
Well, he almost just lives in that one world, and there's no way to bring him out to other things.
Yeah.
But as far as the other influence that we don't even think about, 1989, the next year, Simpsons became the first successful primetime animated show since the 1960s. Since Flintstones and Jetsons and all that stuff. Yeah. And actually, the gal who did the voice of the shoe that dies became the voice of Bart Simpson.
Yes.
So she's directly tied to both of them.
God. You could posit to say that with the success, absolute major success of Who Framed Roger Rabbit in 1988, 1989, maybe audiences were getting primed to actually attach to animation again, and that might have actually set up The Simpsons for that long staying run.
And then hopefully this will blow your mind. I didn't realize this. Nickelodeon founded Nicktoons, their cartoon arm, in 1990, and then Cartoon Network was founded in 1992. So basically everything we know of animated movies in terms of the Disney Renaissance and animated TV shows was all predicated on this thing succeeding.
Now, 90s cartoons have their own place of nostalgia. They really, really, really do. I'm only now realizing that really only comes to be because of Roger Rabbit. Because Roger Rabbit has gotten audiences' attention in 1988, 89. They want more fresh stuff. Like Roger Rabbit is as nostalgia as it is. It's cutting edge fresh. Audiences are hungry for more of that. That's fascinating to think that Roger Rabbit you could really boil it down in a way. You could look at the 90s cartoon boom through the lens of Roger Rabbit. That's crazy.
Exactly.
And then it's sad he doesn't get to like live and enjoy and all that.
It's almost beautiful because it's like here's one thing
at the same time. Absolutely,
the pivot point where they really encompassed. It's a love letter to animation, to the things that Williams and Robert Zemeckis loved. come from this completely bizarre book that isn't even almost related to it, but just the idea that there's a hope that animation and people can live together. And then there it is embodied in real life, where now we're able to enjoy it further than the 50s and 60s.
Yeah, even if he just stays right there, I mean, he really injected a whole new life into the medium.
So I found that sort of as what it means for art is like, take the chance to bump the lamp in your own work and what you're doing. Like they could have made it easy. It wasn't easy, but they took the chance.
It wasn't the rule. It wasn't a rule. It was just harder.
Yeah. Making it harder for yourself. Like they didn't
exactly.
Like,
yes.
Yeah. Because eventually somebody will notice and it will mean something.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Taylor. That was a blast. Thank you guys for sticking with us. I hope you loved that. Reach out to us on Instagram at ILLITERATEPOD. You never know what our next episode is going to be. Send any suggestion, whatever you're reading, whatever you're watching, whatever you're excited about coming out. You never know when we'll pick it for an episode just like this one. So can't wait for next week. We'll see you there.